everyone, my name is Manal Al-Faiz and you're watching From Scratch. On today's episode of From Scratch, we're making puff pastry. A quick puff pastry to make two different dishes. We're making a quick Danish filled with cream cheese and raspberry filling and some Parmesan sticks. I have Chef Yasmin with us. Chef Yasmin has been a lifelong friend. She has been working with us at GICA offering really awesome classes, and we're going to be making the puff pastry together. So for our puff pastry, what we're going to need is some all-purpose flour, some sugar, some salt, cold milk, very cold butter that is grated through a box grater, and ice cold water. So, Chef Yasmin, let's get started. We're going to grab the flour, if you could help me with this.
Okay.
We're going to empty it out in our bowl.
We'll put
Yes,
all dry ingredients.
Yes, exactly.
First,
There we go.
flour, sugar,
Salt.
salt,
And we're just going to give it a quick mix.
together.
And before adding any of the wet ingredients, what we're going to do is add in the butter. Please do keep in mind that this butter is ice cold. It just came out of the freezer and we grated it through a box grater. So if you could help me out with this. Yes, we could just use the whisk to lower it down. Just gonna give that a quick mix, making sure that all of the flour thoroughly covers the granules of butter, exactly. So the granules of butter needs to be, this is a quick puff pastry. So a quick puff pastry is kind of like a hack on puff pastry. It's a quick and easy way of making puff pastry at home. And this recipe is really dependable. I've been using this recipe for quite a long time and it has worked every time. You just need to make sure that the temperature of ingredients are all at the correct temperature, which is cold, exactly. So we just gave that a very quick mix, making sure that the butter is fully covered with flour. We're gonna add in the ice cold water. Yes, right inside. And then, yes, and the milk has to also be quite cold. We're just gonna give that a thorough mix. Just making sure that all the flour and the butter has been hydrated with the liquid, and the flour content starts developing gluten. So we're using all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour doesn't have so much gluten in it. So resting process is quite important. So what we're gonna do right now is make sure that everything is covered with the liquid. Butter is starting to slightly melt into the dough. We're gonna cover this with plastic wrap and let it rest for a minimum of 1 hour. So that's quite important. So you could swap out from using the spatula to using your hand with kneading, but what you want to achieve is a saggy dough, a shaggy and saggy dough. So it doesn't have to be a completely kneaded dough. It's just a saggy, shaggy dough. That resting time will help develop the gluten and let it become one. Yes, perfect. Plastic wrap, yes. So we're actually going to cover this with some plastic wrap, let it rest aside in a chiller or your fridge, and wait for 1 hour. While we wait for 1 hour, we're actually going to go ahead and mix together the filling, and we'll be right back. We transferred our dough to our station. What we're going to do is Chef Yasmin is going to slightly knead it on the station. And this is just to make sure that all of those dry pieces have been fully saturated into the dough, creating one, let's say, bulk of a dough. you don't want to over knead it. So all you want to do is, yeah, just ensure that you got everything saturated. Let it rest in the chiller for about 1 hour or even more, just to make sure that that gluten is developing on its own in the chiller. So Chef Yasmin, once you have that kneaded properly, we're going to transfer it to our plastic wrap it and pop it in the fridge.
Thick square.
Yes, exactly. I have a rolling pin right here for you.
And every time we rest the dough, we have to cover it with plastic bag to avoid it forming the crust.
Yes, exactly. That's a very important tip. So you want to ensure to cover it with plastic wrap just to avoid from it drying out and creating that thick layer at the top. And that does not saturate again. So you would have to get rid of the dough. Welcome back, everyone. So while our dough is resting in the fridge for about 1 hour, what we're gonna do is actually work on our filling. Our filling will consist of cream cheese and raspberry jam filling. Raspberry jam is gonna be added towards the end. What we need to do is actually make the filling. And the filling consists of the following: some cream cheese, some sugar, lime juice, lime zest, and 1 egg and 1 egg yolk. What I'm gonna go ahead with doing is putting the cream cheese in our mixing bowl.
Cream cheese must be in room temperature.
Exactly, the cream cheese must be at room temperature and all the rest of the ingredients should be at room temperature. And that's gonna help you with mixing everything together. It's gonna be nice and easy and room temperature. So Chef is going to go ahead with breaking the egg right into here. Yes, there you go. And then I'm gonna need also 1 yolk. All we need is 1 whole egg in this bowl and 1 yolk, and we're gonna combine that together with our cream cheese. There we go, perfect. Okay, I'm gonna grab our sugar, add it in over here. And Chef, if you could just hand me a spatula. A spatula, yeah. That's perfect. So I'm just going to soften or start initially softening the cream cheese together with our sugar. And this is going to take a bit of time just because cream cheese is a bit tough, even though it is at room temperature. So take your time while mixing this together.
We can't use sugar powder.
I mean, sugar powder is going to differ in grams, so you would probably need a bit more of icing sugar as compared to sugar. The sugar over here is needed because it has larger granules, so mixes better together. So what we're gonna do is grab the zester, and you can grab the whisk. I'm gonna swap this around. Thank you so much. I'm going to zest this alone. So a good trick to keep in mind is whenever you want to zest something without adding it yet, is grab your zester, let the collection side towards you while your lime is in your hand, and you're just going to zest it and collect the zest without making it fall out. So while Chef Yasmin is mixing that together and whisking it and making sure everything is nice and homogeneous, I'm just gonna add in the zest once I have it collected. This is quite an easy way of zesting as well. I always use this trick whenever I have like mass amounts of zest that I need to zest from my citrus. This is a really great trick to keep in mind. So we're just adding this inside, and I'm gonna add in our eggs. So the egg content is there to help solidify it after baking, after being in the oven. So egg is quite important. Okay, looks perfect. So what we're gonna do is cover it up, set it in the fridge, take out our dough that has been resting for an hour, and roll it out and start doing the folding process. I'll see you guys after the break. have our dough that we just pulled out of our chiller. It's just been sitting out for, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes. You want it to come back to room temperature to easily roll it out. What we're gonna go ahead by doing right now is rolling out the dough and layering. So this is quite important for a layered dough. Since a puff pastry is a layered dough, you need butter content as well. So what we have here is equal quantities of butter, which has been shredded at the beginning and set in the freezer to go completely cold. So this is very important. Assess your temperature of your room. So this is also very important to keep this in mind. If you have a very warm room, well, your puff pastry isn't really gonna work. So make sure you have a cold room, some cold ingredients for you to be able to successfully make your puff pastry. And this is a quick and easy puff pastry, keep that in mind. With a real, let's say, traditional puff pastry, it's going to go a bit different. So what we're gonna do is actually open up the dough and start by rolling it out, yes, and Chef Yasmin is going to help me with that. I have some extra flour right here to dust the surface. What I'm gonna do is just quickly dust the surface to make sure that I don't have the dough sticking on your surface. Here you go, your rolling pin right here. So Chef Yasmin is gonna go ahead with doing that. And good information to always keep in mind is that puff pastry is a layered dough. With that comes different layering techniques. What we're doing is a very quick and easy layering technique, but there are many different ways, as I said, to include the butter. So right now what we're gonna do is something called a butter inclusion, which is considered as the first fold. So that's exactly what we're gonna do, and we're gonna show you a very quick and easy way of doing so. But always keep handy a ruler at home. Ruler is quite important. You want to be very precise with measurements, with ingredients, with all of that. So keep a ruler handy at home. Mm-hmm. Ah, that's nice. That's a really easy way. What I usually do is move it around. Yeah. I actually pick it up and move it around. But that's a really quick way, yes. So you're also assessing while you're rolling it out whether or not your butter has started to melt. I think this is fine, but what you want to make sure of is you've got all of that dough easily detachable from your surface. You don't want it to stick on your surface and then you'd have to roll it again. So Chef Yasmin has completely finished with rolling it out. What we're going to do is grab the first part of the butter, and these are equal quantities, and kind of divide your dough into 3 visually. You don't have to use a ruler for this. So you want to divide your dough into 3 parts. You've got this as the first, this as the middle, and this as the top part. So this is exactly what we're going to do, is take the middle part of the dough and spread out the shredded butter. Keep in mind, I did shred it with a box grater, and then we placed it in the freezer to set. What you're gonna do is spread out the butter, leaving kind of a short space towards the outer edge. You don't want that butter to seep out. Yes. Yeah, you just wanna make sure it's encased in the dough. So we got the first or the middle part of your dough covered with butter. What you're gonna do is flip over the first half of your dough and kind of make sure you got that sealed edges right here. And then you're gonna do the same with the next batch of your butter and just easily spread it out. Quick spread, and then fold this one. Yes, on top. You're going to fold the other half or the last part of your dough right over. Okay? Yes, exactly. And then we're just going to bring this up and over. make sure you've got all of that dough or all of that butter kind of tucked in your dough. You don't want it to seep through. Okay? And then what you've got is a packet of dough that is ready to be rolled out and then starting to do your folding process. But always keep in mind that the flap side that is open is always set to your right side.
Yes.
So you flip it over, keep the flap side onto your right, and then you're ready. Yes, exactly. And then you're ready to roll it out into the same dimensions as the first time we rolled out our dough. So Chef Yasmin, could you please go ahead with rolling it out? So the technique that you're watching right now is a very important technique to keep in mind whenever you're dealing with puff pastries or any laminated dough, is pushing down firstly without starting to roll. The initial movement that you're always going to do is push down the rolling pin, and this prevents your butter from kind of splitting or breaking apart. Your butter is quite cold, so you want to make sure you got that butter that will roll out quite easily while you roll out the dough. So what we're going to do is, again, do the folding process, which is very simple. And this folding method right here that Chef Yasmin is doing is called a letter fold. So let's actually show how to do a book fold. How about we show how to do a book fold? So this is how a letter fold looks like. With a book fold, it's very easy. You've got your rolled out sheet of dough, and you're kind of dividing your dough into 4 parts. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And all you're doing is folding this right over, and folding this right over here, and then folding this like that. So this is called a book fold. But for today, we are covering a letter fold, which is kind of like a three-way fold. So this is very simple. Roll it out just like so. We're gonna set this in the fridge after folding and let it rest for, let's say, 30 minutes. And this resting procedure will help us bring that temperature of your butter back to a cold temperature, rest that gluten. We're gonna wrap this up in plastic wrap, set it in the chiller, and then we're ready to do our last and final roll. Right after this 30 minutes, what we're gonna do is roll it out once again to the final thickness and start filling it and baking it in the oven. We have our dough that has been resting in the fridge for around 30 minutes up to 45 minutes. And what we're gonna do is roll it out into the final roll, ready to be baked in the oven. But before baking, what we're gonna do is fill it out with our fillings. So Chef Yasmin is going ahead with rolling it out into a nice even thickness of 3 millimeters, which is going to be quite easy to make if your dough has been set out of the fridge or your chiller 10 minutes ahead of time to come back to room temperature. Not so warm, but you want it to kind of start warming up slightly for it to be easy to roll out. So Chef Yasmin, I think we're ready to start cutting it into the portions that we need. But what we need to do is reserve a small part that we're actually going to use for our sticks. Yes, so we're just going to cut that out and reserve it aside. What we're going to proceed with doing is start by cutting out little squares to have those squares of our danishes ready to start filling out. There you go. So we're just going to go ahead with cutting this, getting those squares ready to be filled out. And there you have your squares for your danishes ready to be filled out. The last and final step that we need to actually make before starting to fill them out is cut out the edges to kind of start by initially folding them. So I always usually do this at the very beginning before filling them out, because with the filling it's going to be very hard with shaping them. So what you want to do is initially go in just like so, cut out the edge, yes, making sure you don't go all the way through. You want to keep it intact.
Also,
And
you can make it like that.
yes, and you can make it like that, exactly, which is much easier. So we're gonna keep on doing the same cuts for the rest amount of your dough, and you're going to set those aside, get all of your fillings ready in a piping bag, and start piping and pop them in the oven. So before filling our danishes, which we have already, Chef and I already started laying them out on a tray, ready to be filled, egg washed and baked, what we're gonna do right now is actually make our egg wash. Our egg wash will act as the glue between the cheese and our puff pastry. So for that, what you're gonna need is 1 egg, some milk, and to top off everything for our cheese sticks, all you need is some grated Parmesan. So what I'm gonna do right now, and Chef is going to help me, is crack the egg into our bowl. And Chef, I need you to just start by whisking that. We're gonna add a bit of milk. Just gonna add in the milk. So milk works as a browning agent together with our eggs. So the more milk you have in there, obviously you don't want to add too much milk, but the addition of milk is going to help with giving that a nice dark brown color. So what we're going to do is grab a brush, a pastry brush, and start by smearing all of that egg wash onto our puff pastry sheet, as you remember that we set aside to use for our cheese sticks. So that is going to act like the glue, kind of keeping that cheese on top of our puff pastry. We're gonna set this aside and add some vanilla later on for our danishes. Yes, exactly. So what's left to do is just add a good amount of cheese right onto your prepared sheet of puff pastry. So we're just gonna spread that out, making sure you got a good amount, just because this is going to melt off. Yes, exactly. So it's going to melt off and kind of create a very thin layer. So you want to go generous on the cheese and make sure you got that onto every corner. Chef, I'm gonna need your help with cutting it into smaller pieces. Yeah, that's perfect. There you go. So make sure you do have this tool at home. It's very helpful. You could always switch it out with using a very sharp knife. What I like to do is do this. I pick them up, and do keep in mind that you will lose a few pieces of cheese, so that's fine. What you can do is kind of push them in to make sure that you got them stuck onto the puff pastry sheet. What I do is just simply twist it, just like so. And then you've got one side that has no cheese and one side that does,
Yeah.
which looks really nice after baking it in the oven. So I'm just gonna set this onto our tray. And then we're just gonna keep on doing the same technique to get them all nice and twisted. So we're gonna set this aside. I'm just going to wipe down the station, and we are ready to start filling our danishes. So we have our cheese sticks ready to bake. What's left to do, I do want to put these all together at once in the oven. So what's left to do is fill our danishes. So if you do remember, we already made our cream cheese filling. And what I have over here in this piping bag is some raspberry jam. Super easy, store-bought raspberry jam, just placed in the piping bag. What we're gonna do right now is just snip off the end of our piping bag. Here you go, chef. There you go. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is fill our danishes with a good amount of cream cheese filling. Just like so. Actually, I should start from all the way at the end to help chef fill it with the rest of the filling. So what you want to always keep in mind is you check the temperature of your dough. If your dough feels a bit too warm, you do want to pop it in the fridge for a couple of minutes, let's say 10 to 15, and let it come back to a cold temperature. You don't want that butter to start melting. So the very last step that we're gonna do is brush it with some egg wash, and the egg wash that we're gonna use is the same one that we used for our cheese sticks. So there's no need to break a new egg, add some more milk. So we have that, and I didn't add any salt or vanilla, so we are able to use it for many various different things. So ovens are preheated at 200 degrees. 200 degrees is a very high temperature, but it is very needed for your puff pastry. The reason why puff pastry puffs is because of the butter content. Exactly, butter content, once it is exposed with heat, starts to melt off, and this melting process will create steam in your puff pastry. So what's going to happen is your puff pastry is going to rise and create that puff, otherwise known as puff pastry. So what we're going to do right now is pop this in the oven together with our cheese sticks. Wait until they have completely puffed up and turned golden in color. So this is going to differ in your home oven. So you need to assess whether or not they are done. A good way to assess whether or not your puff pastry desserts or baked goods have been fully cooked is by assessing the bottom of your puff pastry. If your bottom of your puff pastry is nice and golden, that means it's fully cooked through. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. We're gonna go to the oven, pop these in the oven, and we'll be right back. So we just pulled out our baked goods out of the oven and the room smells heavenly. So what's left to do is just zest some limes on our danishes and we're ready to plate. So I'm just gonna go ahead and grab my zester and zest my danishes. So not only will your limes add some more flavor, it will also add a pop of color. So danishes are also very versatile. You could fill them with savory fillings as well. You could literally make it anything that you would like. You could even make a pizza flavored Danish. So it's solely up to you. So what I'm gonna do is plate this up, and Chef Yasmin is going to help with plating up the cheese sticks. So there we have it, our finalized dishes. What's finally left to do is just dust them with a bit of icing sugar, and this is also optional, whether you want to add some more sweetness into your final Danish or not. Our final dishes are made from scratch from our quick puff pastry. Super delicious, super easy to make. Thank you so much, Chef, for being on this show. I'll see you guys next time on From Scratch.